I could tell with the last debate when you were going full Leroy Jenkins on it.
No, that
The
was actually
Charizard foil.
that was the
Charizard foil.
Does Sickles have a nickname? If not, can we petition for like Dan Shiny Charizard Sickles?
I call
It's like
I've called him Dan the Man, but as
Welcome to Questioning History, the banter episode, where a group of guys with none of the answers ask all the questions. And I'm joined here today yet again by our two Jonathans, Jonathan Woody of Warhawk, Jonathan Teagan of Civil War Week by Week. How you guys doing?
good.
I'm doing good.
And they were saying that under the whole guise that we didn't just film like a 2-hour long debate episode and they're tired. That's just how we roll here.
I've been using Monster Energy drink successfully.
I could tell with the last debate when you were going full Leroy Jenkins on it.
No, that
the
was actually
Charizard foil.
Charizard foil.
I tried to have not as much energy as last time because I feel like last time was like a Southern lawyer going full out from from my cousin Benny. Like, now
Yeah, no, man,
imagine
it was
this,
good.
my friends, a great picture about the African American troops at Allen Mound. I was like, yeah, no one really wants to see me do that, so I decided I'd be more subdued. I'm like, this is boring, and I just went shaking. And I'm like, Leroy. Boil Charizard.
If it makes you feel any better, without telling Kings and Generals this, I began one of our series by doing accents for figures in history, and I did a Churchill, and it was pretty bad. So it was one episode in the Pacific War series where people told me, I was like, yeah, don't do Churchill again.
Oh, I'm gonna have to find this.
I did a Russian accent for a video I did about Ivan Turchin, and I would just have someone say, "This is comedy." I'm like, if I say I went for that, does that make me a terrible person for joking about deaths or a secret brilliant?
Oh god.
You know how loads of Civil War generals have got nicknames to them? You've got Stonewall Jackson, Unconditional Surrender, da da da. Does Sickles have a nickname? If not, can we petition for Dan Shiny Charizard Sickles?
I call
It's
I've called him Dan the Man, but as the primary Sickles fan, I feel like I have been tasked with it. But I feel like he was nicknamed the Defender of the Woman's Honor of DC for his murder. So that might be a little bit long, but
like I say, it's not as catchy as Stonewall.
yeah.
Stonewall Jackson's probably my favorite name from the Civil War. It's so good.
He didn't
It's
even
good,
like
isn't
it
it?
either.
Did he not?
That name belongs to the brigade, which he fought
Yeah.
with at Bull
Yeah.
Run. So
Oh, okay. Oh.
Yeah, he has Devil Dan. Devil Dan Sickles.
That's pretty cool.
That's
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
It was, though, I think, named after the Devil's Den during Gettysburg, so not as cool. But
How many did Grant have in reference to his alcoholism?
500, I would guess. So,
yeah, the newspapers were kind of critical on him about that. They're like, "Oh, he's a drunkard. Oh, he's drunk at Shiloh. Oh, he's drunk here. He's drunk there." It's like, is there a battle he's not drunk at according to the news?
Isn't there that sort of famous thing where Lincoln was whatever he's drinking, get him more, or give it to my other generals.
yeah, give it.
I was gonna say, as soon as he wins the war and he's signing the treaty, he's like, I'm drunk right now, guys. But Pete, did you want to talk about this book that you have?
Well, yeah, just because. So I have a book of 100 greatest military commanders, da 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 da, and there are some heavyweights in there. You got your Caesars, you got Hannibal's in there, Henry V is in there, Richard Ironheart, da 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 da. And there are only 4 Civil War generals in there. There's Grant, there's Lee, there's Jackson, and there's Sherman.
Big 4, yeah.
Yeah. Firstly, do you think that the 4 belong in 100 best military commanders?
I'm gonna have to go iffy with Sherman, but I believe the other 3 definitely.
Iffy on Sherman. Why iffy on Sherman?
Sherman just kind of, he wasn't the best general that they had. It's just that he was good friends with Grant, which kind of led to him being appointed command of the military district of the Mississippi in 1864. So like there were many situations in the 64 campaigns of like Atlanta and the March to the Sea where he could have done things like differently, but he like Kennesaw Mountain, for example. He literally just fought the battle of Kennesaw Mountain because he thought his troops were getting too soft because they were doing all these flanking attacks, which meant that they weren't doing like heavy frontal assaults.
Right.
So he's like, you know what? They're not doing enough frontal assaults. They're getting soft. We need to throw them into a frontal assault just to remind them that they're soldiers or something like that. So, I mean,
Yeah, okay, that doesn't sound great.
yeah, but he's an interesting. I mean, I think that's interesting they include him in there because like I definitely think in terms of being a modern general, he's a great general. Like he kind of foreshadows the total war of industrial warfare through his like burning of like his March to the Sea campaign where he just like burns everything down on his way to Savannah. So in that regard, yeah, he was great as being like a kind of progenitor of modern total war.
Tegan, what do you reckon?
I'd question all four.
All four.
Yeah. With Stonewall and Lee, if I'm not mistaken, they when they got in their right command, they were very good. But early on in the war, from I believe Rich Mountain, and then Stonewall Jackson right before First Battle Bull Run, they both lost. And I mean, in my mind, when they were in the right position, fighting against the right people, yeah, they did great. I mean, Stonewall Jackson took over the valley in his campaign, and we kept the army running for quite some time. But in my mind, what was it, 100 greatest? I'm not sure any of them should be in there.
No, Grant not even getting like a little.
No, I won't even give it to Grant. No.
Do you think Grant gets more recognition because of the presidency?
No, no one cares about his presidency.
No. That presidency is actually probably like, that's the part that no one likes to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that book that came out not too long ago is trying to like redeem like everything that he did as a president.
Well, he did good things, but just, I mean, I went to Grant's farm recently, and I could just say a lot of the stuff around his presidency was, did you know that he was president?
Yeah.
But the battle you were talking about with Jackson was Hoke's Run, and that wasn't really a defeat. That was more like just a rear guard action. So,
and he lost some battles during his Valley campaign also.
Yeah, the only time Jackson didn't really do well, I guess, was when he was like, kind of ironically, when he's working with others. Like when he's by himself, he's like on the ball. He's doing whatever, he's screwing up the enemy so hard that they're like, they don't even know what to do next. But when he's like working under Lee, except for maybe Chancellorsville, he doesn't really do that well. Under subordinate, like immediate subordinate command in a field. Like the 7 days battles was probably his worst performance in the whole Civil War, because in his whole career anyways, because he messes up on all the 7 days of the battles. And then he also does poorly in the Fredericksburg campaign, where it's his sector of the field that actually gets broken through on Prospect Hill by Meade's Pennsylvania Reserves Division, or his division. So it's like Lee and Jackson is just kind of interesting because it's like he works well when he's by himself, and like Longstreet on the other hand works well when he's working with others. But when he's by himself, like he was in the Knoxville campaign where he got beat by Burnside of all people, I mean, it just kind of shows how like it's kind of ironic that it's like, Longstreet does well with when being told what to do. Jackson does better when he's given no directions, basically.
Yeah, I think also we needed his subordinates to do well. He relied heavily, and that's probably, and I'm going to just go through some of my mind, that's probably why we remember his subordinates so well. I mean, when it comes to Union command, I mean, a lot of this also has to do with the lost cause myth of the early 20th century and late 19th century, where they was a lot of focus in the South that kind of trickled up north. But also when it comes to Lee, he had at his best a star-studded cast of Longstreet, his old war horse, Stonewall Jackson, a guy he could send alone to take care of things, AP Hill, Ewell. But I mean, when they didn't do what he wanted, you ended up with mistakes like at Gettysburg and the like. And I mean, to me, we also had a huge problem with being on the defensive. And I feel like when it came, well, Stonewall Jackson had his strong suits, but when things didn't, he was a very strict commander. When things just didn't go his way, he crumbled. And I mean, he was great at making things go his way, but all you needed was to throw him ever so slightly off, and he would freeze like a stone wall.
What like you mentioned, like the sort of like lost cause idea, like, is this still like an ongoing? I mean, I imagine there must be some people who still cling on to this idea.
Yes,
but I think like it's difficult from an outside perspective, I think, to get like a feel for if it really is like a big thing that people cling on to, or if it's just like a loud minority, or like...
I feel like I've noticed it's more like I noticed the boomers are a lot more like lost causey because that's what they were raised on. I've tended to notice that like in generations, like the baby boomer generation tends to cling on more to lost cause elements, and then I feel like the modern generation gets a little too like hardcore when it comes to like hating on the South. I'm a huge proponent of like looking at both sides and then seeing what the common soldiers on both sides were fighting for. But in today's generation, it's like all Southerners were traitors. They were all bad people. They were all like, end of story. Like, I don't know. I feel like there's like there's no balance anymore. It's either you're a boomer and you think that the South was all like, they were all great people, or you think that they were all traitors in the modern generation.
It's kind of like current American politics.
Yeah. And I always counter when people say, like, when they're like, oh, they were all traitors. I'm like, well, they technically weren't, because Abraham Lincoln said malice towards none, charity to all. So I mean, the whole idea was that they weren't in the end going to be considered traitors. So
I've always wondered, with all the civil wars that we've seen in history, which is of course many, how far does the American Civil War stack up to like some of the worst that humanity's ever seen in significance?
I think with civil wars, they usually are a national thing.
Usually, but sometimes they do implicate other countries. Like the Spanish Civil War was just like a testing ground for World War II.
Yeah. So I mean, when it comes to brutality, it's hard, especially with, I mean, population always has the influence, because Chinese Civil War, you're just not going to be able to compete when it comes to carnage.
Or the Russian Civil War, where you had the other powers getting involved at the start with like the expedition to the Arctic and all that.
Yeah, Siberian intervention is a lot bigger than people think. It's someone could do a decent series just on that, because you got quite a few years, and just focus on the Japanese and their craziness and how they almost went to war with a bunch of nations while they were doing that and stuff.
Then you have the English Civil War and questions of the monarchy and how that went around. So I mean, I think the American Civil War, when I say it has a lot of impact on American economics more than anything, you really start to see the building blocks with income tax, a bring back of the national bank, the way we started doing things, which would transform us into a bigger economic powerhouse. Of course, there were many bumps along the road, which I have feelings about, but
I guess in comparison to the War of 1812, in like what it did to move American technology, proud, military capabilities, the economy, like you said. I guess like the Civil War is extremely significant for like the progress of America.
Yeah.
I think it's actually, I think it is more important than some people might make it out to be in terms of civil wars, because Abraham Lincoln phrased it like, if we lose this civil war, then what does that say of any form of Republican democracy government that's formed like our system? Basically, the American Civil War was like, it was a test to see if American form of government could survive in any situation. So in that regard, I think it's really interesting because it really did, like, because all the other in Europe, they're all like, they're either absolute monarchies or they're constitutional monarchies, but they're not really like we basically set the example for what countries like in Europe that would later become democracies. We basically set the example for that. So I feel like the Civil War is really important in that it proved it was a proving ground to see if our system of government could actually work at all.
Think you want to say something, Pete?
Well, I was thinking of like, I mean, as a Brit, it always like rankers when it's like, the inspiration for all the other governments is like Rome was there first. Rome was there first.
Yeah, they were, but their system failed.
Yeah, their system did fail, and
So it's kind of like a thing where like, do you want to can it survive in a modern system when it failed in the ancient system?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it is like, it is an interesting perspective of the Civil War that like I think it's, at least for me, like often easy to forget about like the political theory, the impact that it has on like political theory and political philosophy like that. But yeah, I mean, do you think that like Europeans should be taught American Civil War history, or do you think it is enough just to sort of like limit it just down almost literally to that like philosophical idea that it's just like, well, it was important because it showed how a modern republic would work, but aside from that, you don't really have to worry about the rest of it.
I think in terms of general education in schools, I think it can kind of be just looked at a glance. Like, I think in terms of like general education, people should be talking about the Civil War in that it was the first modern industrial war ever really fought. I mean, even in the World War I, the Great War series, even Indy Neidell says that like when Europeans went to war in World War I, they were looking at earlier conflicts like the Crimean War and the Franco-Prussian War. And even he says they should have been looking at the American Civil War to see what a long industrial war could be like.
I always give pretty much whenever someone comes fronts with this stuff, like, we should just spend more time teaching about history. And it's like, I mean, sure, but then what do we cut? So I'm never going to be one to, say, you should teach more about this or this. I mean, my mom has a PhD in education and I don't want to get kicked out of her house. So, I mean, in my mind, it's like, I'm not going to question how things are currently being taught because I have neither the expertise nor the knowledge to critique.
But you guys presumably, you get taught Civil War history at school, Yeah. Is there a noticeable change in like the way that it's taught in southern states compared to northern states, or is it sort of just universal across? I don't really know how the American like education system works. I don't know how much flexibility and change you're allowed to have, or if it is just everyone's using the same.
I feel like now it's more consistent now. Like when I was in like AP US history in junior year of high school, they had a very kind of union oriented look at the Civil War. And even when I was in I remember the earliest time I learned about the Civil War was like 4th grade elementary school, and they were still kind of like, they were still pretty much just like very union oriented, not like glorifying the South or anything like that. I think in the past, if you were to go back to like the maybe the 60s through the 80s. I'm sure if you were to go into Southern schools, public schools, it would probably be more like they'd probably have a more Confederate bias. But nowadays, I feel like the system has been kind of more consistent in showing the Union perspective more.
Yeah. I've learned about the Civil War in both the state of Missouri, which is it a Southern state? Is it a Midwest state? It's up for debate. And I also learned in Illinois, which is most definitely considered a northern state. And I would say there is a difference, but of course that just changes from teacher to teacher who have a lot of flexibility with what they teach.
Mhm.
And I mean, the national government has very little control over education. Then you go down to state, down to school district with the superintendent, then down to the teacher. So I mean, from what I heard, just going around, teachers have so much flexibility. If they want to tell you that the South was correct, there's very little stopping them. If they want to tell you that all Southerners are traitors, there's very little stopping them. If they want to tell you that aliens started it all, if they're tenured, they're basically allowed to. I mean,
I've heard things like that too. Like I heard in San Francisco, there was literally a teacher who was like teaching his kids to be communists. Like no, like the parents actually complained to the school board that they actually had a teacher who was like issuing out like tests on like writings on the Communist Manifesto and Mao Zedong, and these are like fifth grade school students.
And I had a second grade teacher who told me about the evil of the Mormons, and I've had teachers tell me a bunch of anti-communist stuff to the point where I'm like, this seems to be more about you wanting to kill a lot of people than anything else.
Like
I
this,
mean,
from what I read in the news, this guy was like literally communist. Like he wanted to make these kids communists. So
no, I had a teacher that told me the Nazis were correcting invading the Soviet Union. I'm like, well, that certainly is something to say to a Jewish student.
Yeah, that's a hot take.
That is
that's controversial.
They started off by saying the Soviet Union invaded Nazi Germany. I'm like, that's not true. And they're like, you're right, but the Nazis were the good guys. And I'm like, this is getting a little awkward for me.
How did he actually like segue into that conversation? He's like, look, about the Lebensraum.
It was my English. It was my English teacher in 6th grade.
Your English teacher talked about this.
So I went to a part of Illinois who had a bunch of Eastern Europeans who fled around the year 1946. This is not an exaggeration at all. So I was arguing with someone whose family did some stuff, is the best way to put it.
Okay.
And the teacher got involved.
Okay.
And yeah, it was very awkward.
It sounds it.
You know, it's like all I can see is like all these like little like news articles you see today about some school in the United States is, you know, critical race theory this or some crazy topic this. And it's like the education system is it must be really stressed out with everything it has to deal with now.
Yeah.
I guess we can't just teach math.
Yeah.
Hang on, I'm gonna be right back. You guys keep talking and be 1 sec.
You get in your notebook again?
It's the cat. I have to deal
Oh, you have
with
a cat too. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys can hear. I have 2 parrots in my freaking condo, and they're like, that's why I'm always muting myself. They're screaming out obscenity. Ugh.
I have 3 dogs, and they can be a pain.
But I'm curious, if you had to choose something else in the American Civil War to base your entire YouTube channel around, what would you choose?
Anything else?
I don't know. I really like the battles, but I guess if I were to choose something else, maybe like the political history of the Civil War, which is equally fascinating.
Yeah, I would go over the politics. I mean, Jesus, week by week it was cool when I was like in 1861, but then you have those times where everything's happening all at once and you're just like, I'm so angry at these long dead people because they couldn't work with my schedule. And it's just, I mean, I would love to cover the politics, how we got there, because I mean, it would never bring in the kind of views the Battle of Gettysburg would get, but also I find it interesting, and I could help some kids out with a push. And anything I can do to screw over the college board is well done in my eyes.
Yeah, actually, I guess you both are in the realm where you hear from a lot of people who are taking like their AP classes in high school.
Yeah.
I rarely get comments, but when I do, it's kind of funny. I get a lot of Japanese high school students who are talking about like 19th century history that I cover, and they're like, "Yeah, you helped me on this course," and I'm like, "You shouldn't be coming to me for this."
Yeah.
I mean, the week by week, I don't know why you're here if you're taking an AP test. What happened in like April? What happened in May 1861 is not going to be on there, buddy. It's about the broad strokes. So
Yeah.
I don't really know that stuff. My second Opium War video got shared in some classrooms, which is
I haven't
also...
seen that, but I'm gonna watch it soon because it's something I've covered extensively.
Yeah. Oh God. And I mean, I actually got to teach my A push class for a little bit, and the key when it comes to that stuff is like, I can give you the broad strokes, but if you want to get in depth, don't take an AP test. I have so many problems with the College Board, but I will not. But like when it comes to, if you're going to cover US history, you can't really go that in depth with anything because of time.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
And Pete, you have any questions for our guests? Being
Hey.
the omnious guy you are.
I was gonna say, was there something like in particular that you were angling at? Because if not, I did have stuff.
Yeah, go for it.
Because like there are tons of or at least there are quite a few Civil War films out about like the American Civil War and everything. And it's just sort of like, it's the classic question which I always like to like ask people who do history about like how useful these films are, like whether they just like misleading people basically, and people just come away with, I don't know, ideas of, yeah, it's just good versus evil, black versus white, or if it is a useful avenue because at least people are then learning something about it.
Like the movie Gettysburg is great if you just want to get an overview of how the Battle of Gettysburg was. Glory is a good movie. Just I like it for getting a feel of how Civil War soldier life was. And Gods and Generals is good if you just want to see like some cool battles. That movie is kind of iffy. I mean, I like the battle scenes, but most of it's kind of boring.
Wait, which one was that?
Gods and Generals. It's the prequel to Gettysburg, and it's very Confederate oriented.
It is.
Okay.
And like, and I know why they were doing that. It's because there's a third book that they were going to make, like that's the sequel to Gettysburg, and I think it was going to be very Union oriented. So I think it was going to be like Confederate perspective, middle ground at Gettysburg, and then Union perspective. But since they canned the project because the second one did so poorly, it just looks like the second one's just like this neo-Confederate propaganda film.
It would be a very good piece of propaganda if it wasn't boring as all hell.
The battle scenes are great though. I like the battle scenes.
I mean, sure, but like my favorite Civil War film is Lincoln, and my second favorite is Glory. And I'm going to quote Civil War historian James McPherson, who's also my patron saint at this point. And he's like, the greatest thing about Glory is it got people interested in the history. And I'm just going to say, Glory has its mistakes. But like whenever I see someone complain about it, I'm like, yeah, they didn't take over the parapets. Yeah, the ocean's on the wrong side. But it's just a great film. And I think it did a lot more good because, sure, people might think the 54th got a little bit further than they did. But like, that's not what really matters in the grand scheme of things. It was the fact that people started feeling it. And Gettysburg, I like Gettysburg. And I'm going to say, I'm surprised it did so well since rewatching it. I mean, you kind of have to be interested in the war already in order to really get into it. But I'll give it to those films. God and Generals, do not watch it. Even if you're going into the battle scenes, they're on YouTube alone, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Go watch those. The story is mostly people sitting down. And Lincoln, great film. Daniel Day-Lewis, great actor. Go for it. The film Copperhead, also by Ron Maxwell. If you see it, you'll be the first one ever. I mean,
I was gonna say I've never heard of that.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
one I've never heard of.
I think the biggest thing that films, Civil War films do is they contribute to the interest in Civil War history. Like the early '90s was the peak of Civil War interest, in my opinion, and that
Ken
was mainly
Burns.
spurred on by like Glory in 1989, Ken Burns Civil War in 1990. I think it was 1990, and then
I think
Gettysburg
it
was 1993. So you kind of have like the peak of Civil War interest in like the early '90s. And I think that like the Hollywood films really contributed to that, because like nowadays there's very rarely any Civil War films I've noticed that are like about like a specific battle or like series of battles. And I don't know, I just feel like the Civil War reenacting community and just interest in general has died down over the past like 20-30 years.
I gotta ask like a funny one. I don't know. Have you guys seen a mockumentary? It's a satire documentary about if the Confederates won.
yes.
The
Oh, yeah,
Confederate
yeah,
States of
yeah.
America.
Jesus.
I have not seen this. What is this?
You should see it. It is.
Is that
Wild.
the Spike Lee one?
Is it Spike Lee who made it?
I think so. And they kind of make fun of Ken Burns' documentary by having like guys supposed to be Shelby Foote.
It's basically a Henry Turtledove novel gone like haywire, where the Confederates win and they're doing like ads and commercials that are like super unbelievably racist, showing like
Right.
this weird world that like emerged, and like it changes World War I and World War II because Hitler just allies to them and stuff.
It's totally unrealistic, but I think like for example, like they showed like the South like conquering the North. Like they didn't want those people. That's why they left in the first place.
Yeah,
I mean, I might have to kind of Woody. I mean, like in my mind, yeah, they didn't want those people because it was a democracy. I feel like with the South victory, they might have decided it might be worth taking it afterwards and suppressing them, because I mean that was their plan, just go southward and suppress if they won. And I wouldn't be surprised if they ran into something they had to stop and they decided to turn north because they were quite expansionist. But oh my god, that film is so hilarious. I love the one with Jefferson Davis, and then this comes in, it's just this accent completely out of nowhere, and it's so rendition. It is hilarious. It is very irreverent. At a certain point, you just get lost in the insanity. I think it's a good film. I'm not a huge fan of Spike Lee, because just not doing any of his political stuff, which I'm not even going to go into that, but just because of his films. But I feel like with that one, he decided to do cocaine and then just went all out.
All in. It's like, I think there's a part where the American government like talks to Hitler about how he's making mistakes with not using slave labor or something.
Yeah, something like our good friends for Hitler.
Yeah. And there's like this little like Photoshop thing with Hitler walking with somebody, and he's like talking to him about the great fields of slavery. It's so bad.
Definitely gonna have to check this out.
Yeah.
Are there a lot of like I was gonna ask you earlier, Craig, Canadian history films that's like pre-World War One? Is there anything on like, I don't know,
Pre-World War One? Okay, you just took all of them away.
Yeah, but is there anything about like, I don't know, Wolf or like the
Canada did this.
Anything?
There's a great PBS documentary on the French and Indian War.
Yeah, exactly. But Canada had this thing where, what do you call them? TV movies. They're things that would have been on cable TV. A lot of those. Yeah, a lot of those. Actually, some are good, but the problem with Canada is we got the French Indian War, Plains of Abraham, and 1812. Like, go Canada, because it was Canada that did stuff. It wasn't the British, because Canada didn't really exist, and it was actually the natives for the most part.
Yeah,
but there's very few things. It's when you talk about war films for Canada, World War One, World War Two. It's always gonna be that. Yeah. Well, it's because I'm just gonna say it here. Canada didn't get a lot of credit for some things, like how the entire Italian campaign, we were the ones, we went through the middle, and then Montgomery and Patton just faked everything and went around the sides, the easy routes. So there's a little salt.
Yeah, you guys got a stiff deal. To be fair, I think like When it comes to like World War One and Two, I think
We're
like
meat in the grinder.
yeah, but like the colonies in general, like people always there's like the forgotten army in India. No one really
Yeah.
cares about like the Anzacs, like and all that
think-
they were doing against the Japanese. No one ever recognizes
It's like
all the
the ongoing joke between Canadians, Indians, and the Anzac forces. It's like which one of us got screwed the most? It's the Indians, obviously.
Well, yeah.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
obviously. But I mean, Gallipoli was a pretty good one too. Yeah.
Yeah, that was.
And then Vimy Ridge and Passchendaele for the Canadians, and
There's a film that was made by like a famous Canadian actor for Passchendaele called
that movie's
Passchendaele.
had a great Passchendaele scene. The romance in it was so boring.
Yeah, I know. It's like the battle and the feeling of like the actual fighting is pretty good in that film, but like kind of the rest, it's like, I don't know.
Another
You
Pearl
can just
Harbor.
watch the battle scene on YouTube, and then the rest
Just
is
like to get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I would say. I feel like, and I'm gonna go throw it out to Glory. It's the only film where I'm like, this is more than the battle scene.
Yeah, good subject matter too. I mean, it
the
really
battle
fits.
scene's actually more like just a. I mean, it's only like the last 20 minutes of the movie.
I think 10 actually. I cut it together for a video I'm doing on the 54th, and it came in for a total of 10 minutes. But like, man, that charge though, and the music, it gets you going.
You know, you mentioned that they had it on the ocean on the wrong side, and I thought back about it. You're like, you're right. They have them coming in on the wrong side.
Yeah, but also it's at that point where it's like, who cares? It's like going to Gettysburg, you're like, wow, those people are way too well fed and old for this. It's like, I mean, you're not wrong, but also like, I feel like when it comes to critiques of historical accuracy, you really do go into that. Well, I forgive this, but not this, and it comes down to a lot of personal taste.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I mean, historical accuracy, you do your best, but it's a movie and you're trying to be entertaining.
Yeah.
I got to interview the historian used for the Battle of Midway film that came out a few years ago.
oh yeah,
And he said that it's probably the most authentic. I mean, he's biased. He was the guy on scene. He said it's probably the most like authentic interpretation of a naval battle, like except for Commander, the other Commodore film that came out a long time ago.
oh, Master and Commander.
Yeah, that I think that has like kind of the record as being one of the best historic films ever made or something. But he really argued that Midway they did like the best that they could, and that they always asked him, and he was always on scene. But I can't talk about it here. But he was used for another upcoming film, and apparently the director like just hired him to say he had his name and didn't even talk to him. And, yeah. So the guy I interviewed, he's like, yeah, so when this film comes out, please tell me what you think. I think it's going to be just shit. So I'm like, okay.
See, with modern history films, especially with stuff like World War II, you really can do like
yeah,
by the minute you can get the exact names and the exact movements that are done, da 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 da. And then you have like ancient history things, and as historians, it's just like, could have been kind of like that. Like it's sort of like, yeah, could be. No one really knows.
Someone will make a movie or a series on the Second Punic War. That's what I want someone to do.
yeah.
Oh,
That's
I
like a
thought there.
story that never gets told.
Amazing story, and like there is like a
That one documentary on it is pretty good. I like that one.
Which is pretty good. And there was talk like when I was like at school or whatever, like 12 years ago, was talk of doing a Second Punic War full-on movie with Vin Diesel as Hannibal.
Yeah, I'd heard of that one.
What? Vin Diesel is Hannibal?
Yeah.
We're gonna kill these Romans like a family.
Yeah.
Kill these Romans. The Chronicles
of Hannibal.
I have no idea why they looked at Vin Diesel and was like, this is a guy who looks like a military mastermind from Carthage.
I gotta ask you, Pete. The interpretation of the pigmentation of Hannibal's skin. Where do you stand on it?
Effectively, was he black or not?
For general audiences who might have come across this, it's like
okay, like in all likelihood, he probably was not like black. He was probably brown.
Yeah.
Carthaginians
were from the Levant, weren't they?
Yeah, I was gonna say Carthaginians come from the Levant. Like they're sort of like Middle Eastern people, but even if they like you know, obviously they've been in Carthage in North Africa for a long time, and maybe, you know, there's more North African blood, but still, like, North Africans today, you know, it's gonna be that same kind of like skin tone, I guess. Although, I mean, it always seems like a bit of a bizarre thing that people get fixated on. Like,
Same
at
as
the end of the,
Cleopatra, yeah.
They didn't
But-
care.
but like at the end of the day, like, yeah, Hannibal was an African general. I don't really see the need to sort of get into discussion about exactly what kind of pigmentation like his skin color was.
Yeah,
It
it's
seems like it always
incredible.
seems an odd question.
It's
to
like
me.
it's stuff that like people in the day did not care about
about
because
at
back
all.
then people cared more about your nationality than your actual like skin color. So they'd be like, "Oh, you're a Roman," or "Oh, you're a Carthaginian," or "Oh, you're a Corinthian," or they
Exactly.
wouldn't say, "Oh, you're white or black or brown or whatever."
And now
Yeah.
we're gonna have like any movie, because I think there is a Hannibal movie that's coming out soon, another one. And you
Really?
know, I remember hearing something, and you know, there's gonna be a huge conversation about that, like Gal Gadot's Cleopatra, whatever film. There's probably a bunch of people who think that it was like she was Egyptian or something, and they're gonna go on and on about the race of these people and stuff. And I'm just, it's so silly, but it's like it seems like the endless cycle when it comes to these historic moments. It's always these people like screaming about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, this
To
comment
me-
section is gonna get heated as well.
It's just it's
It's
just
intentional.
the Mediterranean, southern Mediterranean area. Always just that. For me, the question I've always heard is the question of Jesus' skin color, where, yeah, that's the one I've always heard about.
Oh
Oh
god.
yeah. See, that one's even more touchy. I mean,
Yeah.
but without wanting to delve too heavily into
Okay,
it,
okay.
but just a little bit. The idea that he would have been like, I don't know, Scandinavian white in the
Oh
Middle
god,
East.
no.
It's a
You'd have
bit-
been sunburnt to hell,
Who
honestly.
would be around
Yeah.
the Mediterranean? Like, come on.
I mean, I guess you can make an argument that, like, as because he's like a religious figure, like, you know, people
People identify
like,
them by their culture.
yeah, exactly, yeah, people want their religious icons to, you know, be reflective of them. So people change, like, yeah, you see this like way back in the day with, like, you know, the ancient Greek gods and stuff. People change how they look
Yeah.
in order to fit their ideal and to more easily
Yeah.
reflect like their culture and their person. So
Hong Zhuchan, the guy who was the self-proclaimed brother of Jesus Christ, and he was Hakka Chinese.
is
I'm
he
sure
the guy who's in like the Yellow Rebellion? Is that
He was Taiping,
Taiping.
I thought.
he
Yeah.
he started the
Yeah.
Taiping Rebellion because he had a nervous breakdown. He failed the imperial examination for the 4th time, and he decided that God had given him a heavenly sword to kill demons, and the demons just happened to be the Qing dynasty's bureaucracy. So yeah.
sometimes it just happens to be like that. They're all the demons, just happen to be my enemies.
20 million people later, oops, you know.
Yeah. 20 million. So look, some of the like Chinese history is insane. Like the numbers that get thrown around, it's mental.
The only thing about that one is kind of like Tegan brought up, you know, you had the French, the British, some Russians too, and some Americans were there, and they got involved because the Second Opium War and the Taiping Rebellion, they overlap heavily. So we do have good sources because there was guys watching the Taiping and there was guys watching the Qing. So
All right.
I think like it does seem like an exaggeration, 20 million, but it had to be a big number.
Yeah.
Yeah, either way, it's going to be worryingly big enough. How are we doing for time, Craig?
Oh yeah, we're got like, I'd say like 10 more minutes and we can close this bad boy up.
We got 10 more minutes. All right.
Anything you guys want to talk about so we stop rambling?
No. Let me think. I don't know. I like going to Civil War battlefields, I guess. And those are kind of cool. I guess I could shift the topic to Civil War battlefields.
So if Vin Diesel has to do a reenactment of a battle, which one would you want him to be in?
Would Vin Diesel make a good Ulysses Grant?
Imagine him with the wigs and stuff.
Yeah. big
I
thick
want to
beard and
see Vin
everything.
Diesel as Lincoln, honestly, just giving
Oh
the
my
Gettysburg
God.
Address. Daniel Day-Lewis, eat your heart out. We just have been
Or
Diesel.
score.
You know
years
what's an
ago.
interesting topic I was thinking on was battlefield preservation and how Americans, the American Battlefield Trust has preserved so many battlefields across America. And then I actually got into a discussion yesterday with someone in my Discord about battlefield preservation in Europe and how it's a very, unless if it's pre-World War I, it's a very localized affair. Like,
Yeah.
for example, Waterloo is basically being preserved by the people who live around it. And same can be, unless it's like Eastern Europe where they have a very, like the nationalist countries, like countries with like nationalist governments tend to have like who take, I guess, more of a historical pride in their nation's history. Not to say that people in Belgium don't care about Waterloo, but like, you know, like Poland, they have Grunwald / Tannenberg preserved.
Yeah.
In Russia, Borodino, I believe, is like kind of like a Gettysburg sort of battlefield out there that they've
Russia.
preserved. And then in Ukraine, they had Poltava preserved. I've always wanted to visit Poltava too, but it's like been overrun by Russians now. So
Ironically.
like
yeah.
right on the border.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I always
Russia.
just think it's interesting seeing how like European battlefield preservation is done compared to America, where in America you have like a whole trust set up for the nation, and in Europe it's a very case by case basis. So, and a lot of the pre-World War I battlefields in Europe are kind of preserved like, so they're literally just that, they're battlefields. So like the Battle of Blenheim in Bavaria is it was fought in a field. So like it's based, unless it's like a very urban area, it's mostly all preserved in the fact that just no one lives there. Like Blenheim is a good one. Like it's literally just an open field where the battle was fought, and like it's just fought in rural countryside, so no one lives there.
Yeah, I mean, like, I mean, Hastings is kind of similar. Like, Hastings is just sort of like, oh, there's the field, and it's but I mean, a lot of the time with a lot of like the old battles, people aren't really sure exactly where they happened, anyways. And
Yeah,
they're just
that's
kind of
true.
like guesstimating. It was roughly around here.
Well, yeah,
I
they
think-
have a longer history, so yeah.
I think in France they have that one battle that Julius Caesar fought. I forget what it's called though. It starts with an A. Elysia.
Alicia,
Alicia.
Alicia, yeah,
Elysia.
yeah.
They have that like recreated and everything, which is pretty cool.
That is
That's
cool. That is cool.
And I think the Civil War is like the perfect storm because the way it worked was America's population was so spread out at the time, where you had the landmarks that could be preserved, like wilderness, you had a tavern, and a lot of it, I mean, it was fought around there, but there's always a problem when if you're just fighting in a field, I mean, it's really hard to get a sense of where things were happening. And if you were fighting a siege, well, life goes on and they have to rebuild. I think that's why you don't really see a lot like Fredericksburg, and its battle has been kind of a little bit overrun. And I mean, I think America got pretty lucky. Not really lucky. American battlefield preservation got really lucky.
Yeah.
The people were not looking the slightest with that kind of modern enough where the battles were primarily fought.
It's thanks to the National Park Service, really, because they're the first ones that came.
Yeah.
The Civil War Trust didn't even come until like the 90s or something, like when the peak of that interest was going on. It starts in like the 80s or something, but it really starts to take hold in the 90s. So for like a good 100 years, the only real preservation is the National Park Service.
They're
So
great. So, and with
it
the
is thanks to
trust.
Teddy Roosevelt that we have a
Yeah.
lot of battlefields now.
Yeah.
Well, I
That's-
think a certain little element is just like America is huge. Like you guys have just got the land going, that it's okay to just sort of like preserve some of this like
Well,
like some of our
Yeah.
most like famous battles are now fought in bits where it's like, and there's just the car park, or it's just like a roundabout now, or
Yeah.
it's just it's all just like built over and stuff, but it's just like, oh, there's where like I don't
Well,
know, it's incredibly important, like Bosworth Field was or whatever. Like
I always like to say if you were to preserve every battlefield in Europe, no one will be able to live anywhere.
pretty much.
yeah, true.
Like,
Yeah.
like for example, Belgium and Northern Italy would just be vacant monuments to humanity's stupidity in wars throughout history.
Yeah. And especially with the world wars, everything was going. I mean, it was World War II, that was a war of movement. You can't just copy. And
Yeah.
it was very different. I mean, war has changed, and you don't have full-fledged battles anymore where two armies line up for each other, which oversimplified, but and its description, sure, but like be a lot harder to look at modern wars,
Right.
because it's just doing it.
And they're not battlefields anymore. They're like battle towns and battle orchard. It's all over the place.
Like you couldn't preserve the modern day Ukrainian war because battles are now fought over cities, and you're going, and I mean, even when it's fought over terrain, that's a huge war of movement. I mean, back in the old days, I mean, you have problems with sourcing like life. That's why, again, I'd say the American Civil War was this perfect thing, but also you're going to run into stuff where people want to rebuild. And I mean, it's very easy for me to say, move somewhere else, but I mean,
that's like St. Lo in Normandy. They wanted to leave. It was like totally bombed out, and they wanted to leave it like that as a monument to World War II. And the people of St. Lo were like, we kind of live here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I was gonna say Canada followed in the American footsteps for like preservation, but sometimes major battlefields are just someone lives there. We still have a lot of the good stuff's in Quebec City. Montreal's honestly slim pickings. Where I live, where most of the battles happened, where like either the British or the Americans had actually invaded amphibiously and stuff, like Point de Cascade and stuff. But all we've got is like little monuments, and the Plains of Abraham is where you go to see a concert now. So it's not really preserved. It's cool. I saw Rammstein at the Plains of Abraham.
That's pretty cool.
Fun.
That's pretty cool.
I heard that like the Plains of Abraham was like, it's a battlefield, but it's also like it's like a public park now.
It's like a giant, about the size of 2 American football fields, just wide area.
Yeah,
Right.
I've
It's
been
kind
there.
of preserved.
Great museum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's not. It's honestly, it's kind of a letdown if you were there for like the historic significance. You're not going to see too much. They could have done better, but it's used for like concerts and events, so it makes
The
sense.
American Revolutionary War preservation is very interesting because in the North, especially Massachusetts, very well preserved. And then I feel like
Bunker Hill.
Oh my, yeah. I have some family in that area, and just Lexington and Concord.
Bunker Hill is completely built over, except for the hill itself.
Yeah, the hill itself, and then it has some stuff. But I feel like the Civil War preservation is way more spread out. While this, I mean, I live in St. Louis, and we had a battle here that no one cares about, and I don't think
Jackson.
What?
You had Camp Jackson too.
Oh,
Sorry,
yeah, we had Camp Jackson, and like we're not going to get rid of the arch to preserve it. The arch is the only thing we have going for us besides the Cardinals.
Right.
Well, thank you, gents, for suffering through another hour or so with us. If you just want to tell the audience again who you are, even though I've made you do this 3 times, I'm so sorry. Why they should go see your channels.
So
Woody.
If you want to go see Warhawk, you get this chance to see animated battle map documentaries of Civil War battles as they happen moment by moment. If you're into battles and watching how they unfolded, then definitely check out my channel, Warhawk, on YouTube.
Tegan.
I am a dog fashion channel where I have my 3 dogs also cover this week by week while showing off their greatest stuff on what we renamed to the dog walk. But in reality, I've been covering the Civil War week by week for over 2 years now. If you want to see the small parts, or if you want to hear about the big parts, but without any of the maps to get you distracted with like a nice podcast in the car, because my visuals are not the best, put it on. You want to help a egotistical teenager? Help a guy out.
It's a good sale. It's a good sell. Well, thank you so much. Till next time, this is Questioning History.
Thank you, gents.